After nearly 2 years of waiting, the Game of Thrones Season 8 trailer is finally out, and Entertainment Weekly has our big new Game of Thrones issue also out, going behind the scenes of the Battle of Winterfell. I'm James Hibberd. I'm here with Darren Franich, and we're back with our EW Game of Thrones Weekly podcast.
James, I'm excited to talk about Game of Thrones again with you. The trailer did just come out. I'm excited to dig into the James Hibberd issue of Entertainment Weekly, which everyone should go check out right now, with like, how many covers do we have?
We have 16 covers, which is just bonkers. That's like the most we've ever done in EW's history as a publication. 16 different covers, and it's also 78 pages, and it's all Game of Thrones. So there are retrospectives. We have a oral history of the Red Wedding in there. We have like all sorts of different things to help you sort of catch up before starting the new season, and our set visit, which we'll talk about later. I think we should talk about the trailer first, and then we'll talk about the behind the scenes of the Battle of Winterfell.
So let's dig into the trailer. James, I didn't really know what to expect from the trailer. Obviously, I'd read your feature, and it goes so in depth about the big Battle of Winterfell, so I thought there'd be some of that. Fair to say the trailer is almost mostly that. Not even so much the battle, but we're seeing most of the majority of the characters seem to be at Winterfell now, with a few notable exceptions. Did that kind of surprise you? I mean, like, it feels like, you've kind of made the point before that these Game of Thrones preseason trailers, they often show you way less than you might expect. But this felt very focused on a specific corner of the map, on where, admittedly, most of the characters are hanging out now. But that was definitely kind of a surprise for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think this season, just like the last couple seasons, the trailer is very much sort of, not telling you very much in advance. I mean, and this one, I would guess that maybe half of it is from like the first episode, and half of it is quick shots from the battle episode. And the rest of the season is completely dark. And if you think about it, there's really not much you were actually told that's new. You already knew, Dany was going to, Winterfell. If you read our story, you know that Arya has a, big role in the battle. The things that you learned that were new, I mean, is one that Jaime, it looks like, ends up at Winterfell and
in a fiery inferno,
and
by the look of it.
Yeah, and is part of the action, which you can kind of assume even from the ending of the last season. When he said that's he was going to go north and help in the battle against the dead, but that hadn't been confirmed until now. So that's definitely new.
Yeah, I mean, as far as other just new stuff that I noticed, there was the shot of a fleet that looked like the Greyjoy fleet, but with a lot of gold-looking people on there, which, obviously kind of jumped out at me as a lifelong Greyjoy fanboy. What about that stuff? Was there anything besides the battle that really jumped out at you in this first?
You see, I didn't look at the flags on the ship, but I was thinking that was maybe the Golden Company. Because that was what Euron was going to go buy for Cersei to help, in their sneaky fight.
So Euron was involved somehow. Euron's involved somehow. That's the important
thing. Euron has a good role this season. So I think that might be those soldiers in the golden armor in there. I think that might be the Golden Company ships, and so that would be definitely new. There's also, if you kind of freeze it at just the right spot, you can see Tormund Giantsbane. Who, you didn't really think he died in that avalanche at the end of season 7, but he could have, and this is the first time that they've actually confirmed in some way that he's back.
That's interesting. I mean, like, because there was some thought about, like, they wouldn't just kill someone off like that. But then again, there are so many people to kill this season.
So many to kill.
It would have made sense. James, one thing that I think is interesting to me about the trailer is, I was sort of joking with you, that in a very abstract way, the trailer kind of reminded me of the trailer for Avengers Endgame, insofar as, like, here's a thing that they know they don't really have to sell it, so they can kind of just have a trailer full of sad people in dark rooms, and they know that is going to kind of shut down the internet for the day. But, we also did see someone who looks way less sad. Cersei is hanging out very far from where the action's happening in Winterfell, and I was fascinated by all of her little moments. What was your kind of read on just, like, I don't know, her face in those moments was kind of tantalizing.
So fun fact about that, according to Twitter, the character name that was most used in the first 4 hours of the trailer being launched was Cersei. So that was what people were focusing on the most. And I don't even think she has a line in the trailer, but she has
She's like swilling wine and she's hanging out in King's Landing. Like, yeah, no, she doesn't say or even seem to be really doing anything.
Well,
it's so interesting.
Yeah, but the thing is, Lena Headey, even just not saying anything is just fascinating to watch. She has this one shot where she kind of has that smug Cersei look, and she has this other shot where she has this complex mix of micro expressions, disturbed Cersei look. And I'm dying to know what she's thinking in that part. But one thing that people on Twitter are really focusing on is the fact she's drinking wine, because they're like, oh, clearly she can't be pregnant if she's drinking wine. And I've been reading that, I'm thinking, they don't know in Westeros that you can't drink alcohol. They don't have like fetal alcohol, lectures in Westeros. They don't know that we were still smoking cigarettes, when we were pregnant, 50 years ago.
Yeah. Once she starts giving up deli meats, that's when you know, okay, the Maesters have really talked to her about this now. Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah.
So Twitter's all about Cersei. What are the other kind of big, I've definitely noticed a lot of love for Arya, just because she's so front and center. And
Yeah.
I mean, as your feature kind of gets into, it is so strange that Arya has been preparing for battle, preparing to become a kind of action badass most of the run of the show. And it's interesting that this is kind of going to be her moment in a way. I mean, she's killed lots of people, but this is the sort of Arya unleashed moment, which is really interesting to see. I mean, we see her covered in blood.
Yeah.
She's running down some dark corridor somewhere. Bad things are happening is the basic vibe with Arya in this trailer.
Right. Yeah, she's definitely in the mix and getting to put to use all the skills that she's been honing over all these years. Another thing I would point out in the trailer, my favorite shot is a shot of Dany and Jon walking to the two dragons. They're walking in this purposeful stride. You get the two dragons waiting for them. People are speculating, is Jon going to ride a dragon? Is he going to be riding with Dany? Or are they just going to pet them and feed them? You don't really know what's going on there. But it's interesting because one of the dragons is Rhaegal, which we know is was named after Jon Snow's dad.
Yeah, I was very interested that nothing in the trailer, there wasn't the moment that we're maybe waiting for where someone gives Jon and Dany the news about the fact that they are a little more related than they might have expected. But that is interesting because, I mean, there's kind of, I guess what we expect is there's the two levels to that revelation. One is I'm sleeping with my aunt, which is an interesting moment of realization. But the follow-up will be I guess Jon Snow can be a dragon rider now. That's his sort of part of the bloodline, right? So it's interesting. That's kind of what you're talking about, that he could be approaching the dragons in that way. And just in the kind of,
Well, I think the third leg there is that he has a claim to the Iron Throne. There's multiple levels to that revelation. Yeah, they didn't do the hacky version of that, which is the hacky version of the trailer would have been, Sam goes, Jon, I have something to tell you, and he walks into the room, and then they shut the door, and then it goes black. That would have been totally the other way of going in that trailer. That a lesser show. I could see.
No, I mean, it really is just more they're teeing up these interesting, dramatic moments with everyone. We sort of talked for a second about how Gendry is hard at work in the Forge. He's doing what he should be doing. Grey Worm and Missandei are having what looks to me like maybe a final farewell. We're not really in the point yet where we're going to be doing the death sweepstakes of the season, but I worry about both of those people surviving this season.
Of course, because they're a wonderfully happy, well-adjusted, relatively for Westeros couple, and I feel like you always have to worry about anyone that seems remotely happy with another person on this show.
I hadn't even thought about this, but this is actually making me realize that weirdly, because I'd always assumed that either Jon or Dany were going to die at some point, just for no other reason than that seems very dramatic, and they've both been so central to the show, and the show would of course abuse us in that way. But it's funny that actually the revelation about them being related will make their love life just kind of, I don't want to say disturbing enough, but just out there enough, and it's actually maybe they will live. And they have to kind of live with this knowledge in a strange way.
Yeah, they could live and just be utterly conflicted and miserable about it.
We're sort of talking, James, about how all the teases in this episode, but again, the big battle that's being teased, all we really see of the other side is like the hoof of the horse at the end.
Yeah, you didn't see the
coming
Night
down.
King. You didn't see.
Was that kind of surprising for you? Yeah, that like it is. I mean, again, it's the level this show is at that it doesn't need to show too much more. But it is just funny, such an interesting note to end on.
Yeah, yeah. I was expecting to see that sort of awe-inspiring shot of like legions and legions of the dead. But you know, it might be one of those things where you know they're looking at the episode and they're like, man, that shot's so cool. Let's not put it in the trailer. You know, they sort of think of the opposite of the way people normally think about trailers. It's like, no, this is too good. You know, leave it out of the trailer.
Yeah.
So you know, there's an interview that we did with Dan David, the showrunners, and they were just saying, you know, if it's up to us, you know, we wouldn't even do a trailer. You know, which they're only kind of half joking when they said that. You know, they were still doing a trailer because they want to do a trailer, but you know, they'd have a little bit of mixed feelings because you know they love the idea of people watching and just knowing as little as possible.
That's interesting. Yeah, like could you go the full Beyonce with this and have no? I mean, not full Beyonce because you have to say when the show is debuting, but just sort of drop it in that way. Again, I guess it goes back to the fragile endgame comparison I made earlier, which is like you can just show a lineup of the 13 or 14 remaining characters and just do little moments with them, not necessarily knowing what they're even doing, and that's kind of tantalizing enough for people. Was there anything else in the trailer besides the really fantastic dragon stuff? You mentioned the kind of quieter moment of Danny and John walking up to feed them or who knows what. But again, it's funny watching this now, just being like, well, like there's definitely all the budget in this season because there was the one shot of the dragons going through the canyon, which it just looked a little.
Great.
There was just a little more texture to it, I think, than we've gotten even with some of the great stuff with the creatures in the last couple of seasons.
Yeah. That looks like you know we might get one of those sort of joyous, occasional joyous moments like Harry Potter riding Buckbeak, you know, he's going across the lake, but you know the dragon version of that.
Right. When it's funny because again, you know, thinking about what you can do when, you know, as you mentioned, it's like 10 months and who knows how much to film 6 episodes. Maybe you can actually start to do those quieter moments. Whereas in the past, the dragons have been a little more like, you know, it's time to deploy them for the major fiery action set piece. Like,
Right.
It's funny to think of like we'll see more of them not in their kill beast mode, which would be kind of new for the last few seasons.
Right. And of course, you know, another thing we didn't see is the ice dragon. You know, there's that. You know, how is the ice dragon going to come into play?
Dragon and how do they? Actually, so I didn't even realize that because the Night King is traveling on the ice dragon now.
Presumably.
So that's not even his horse at the end. I'm intrigued to see the ice dragon versus living dragon showdown, which I assume is going to happen at some point. That's one of the big question marks for me because I mean, you know, one of the great things about your feature is you go so in depth about how just the sheer level of practical production that went into that battle is astonishing, and it's, you know, bigger Winterfell than ever before. I thought in the trailer I kind of saw just a few more exterior pieces to Winterfell than maybe we'd seen previously, but the dragons, you know, even with all the money in the world, you cannot do that practically. So it's interesting to see them sort of like holding off on some of that stuff for the season.
Yeah.
Anything else from the trailer that was really kind of jumping out to you this morning?
Let's see. I think we've pretty much hit all the main points.
Is it weird to you just to think about how like as gigantic as this last season is going to be, it's almost the most intimate in a way, just because everybody is in the same, like, you know, the same 100-foot square radius for the first time, basically since the premiere. I guess that's one thing that I liked about the trailer was it sort of mentioned, you had Bran kind of talking about everything you've done has led you here, and that sense of the circle sort of closing back around in Winterfell. It's interesting because, you know, we've been through a couple seasons that are just so gigantic and so spread out all around the continent, and at least this trailer is kind of like it's all happening in Winterfell now.
Right. There's a quote in the feature story from director David Nutter talking about you know, how there's a few shots in it where they have so many series regular characters together that it just kind of feels like you're doing a superhero movie. You know, so to your Avengers point earlier. And there's one episode that he directs, which is very much like what you're describing. It's very sort of like lots of play-like intimacy in terms of, lots of conversations, lots of characters who have either never spoken before or haven't spoken in many years.
And some of them have literally grown to twice their size since the last time they were interacting, it seems like.
Right.
To me, that still is, in a way, just thinking about the effect of this trailer, one other thing you can draw upon is the fact that some of these characters, we've seen them grow up in front of us. And I always think that is the, just mentioning the Harry Potter thing, somehow Game of Thrones became the Harry Potter of this decade in that specific way, that it's like Arya and Sansa and Jon, and even Dany to a certain extent, you've seen them kind of grow up and grow into these roles, and grow beards the way that we did for some of the guys.
Well, our Arya and Sansa haven't. Yeah, there's a little exchange in the story where Sophie Turner and Maisie Williams are just sitting there in this smoky, dark hangar by themselves, and they're just like going, we're no longer the little kids of Game of Thrones. This sort of reflective moment. They're thinking about how much things have changed.
Well, I want to dig into the feature, if that's cool, James, because I've been fortunate enough. I've read it through a couple of times. I even read some of the special deleted scenes that maybe you'll be revealing at some later date. My favorite stuff in it comes from my personal superhero, Miguel Sapochnik.
I mean, Miguel Sapochnik is, for those who don't know, he directed Hard Home, he directed The Battle of the Bastards. He takes on the battle episode in this. I mean, it's pretty incredible what he did. I mean, at one point, David Benioff, the showrunners, mentioned that he says, I don't think any director has ever worked as hard on a television episode in history than he worked on this. I mean, the guy was really going for it. I mean, there's one part where he's literally directing 3 different scenes from 3 different units at the same time and sort of trying to dart between them. And which, for anyone who knows how these things are put together, that's just nuts. I mean, it's so hard.
And what I love is that, in your kind of reporting for the feature, you have just these great, to me, details I can grasp onto. The fact that there were 11 weeks of night shoots for this single episode, and that wasn't even really the end of the filming of the episode. That was just the sort of night shoot portion of it. The number of people, 750 people working all through the night. But I just kind of love, on an artistic level, hearing Sapochnik discuss it, because he mentions this notion of we were going to film it a certain way. He kind of mentions it as almost kind of like the Marvel movie method of where you're kind of cutting it up and where there's green screen. And it seems as if at some point he certainly was very adamant about let's try to make this. We have this space to work with. Let's make it as if not realistic, certainly as vivid and use as much of the space as we can. Which seems like, I mean, I don't know how many weeks that added to the process, but I assume it was a few.
Yeah, because normally if you sort of chop it up, really tightly, you can plan every single specific shot, every single specific close-up, and you only really need, whoever's on camera and the basic crew for that particular moment. But if you do it in a more expansive way and you allow for a certain amount of flow and improvisation, and you end up with basically the whole cast that are there and within that battle on set, and then with all their attending crew members as well, and so you end up with a lot more people on set for a much longer time, and that's how it ended up being those 11 weeks of night shoots.
And what's interesting to me about that is, again, kind of getting back around to what can you accomplish with a show when you have 10 months to film 6 episodes, and when you're able to, with a battle scene, or, because Sapochnik directed 2 episodes this season, right? I guess it's really interesting to me, you mentioned that David Nutter has an episode that is more kind of dialogue and more interactions. I'm glad to see that they're very aware of kind of balancing that. I wonder if there was some notion of we have to make every week extravaganza, and every week needs to be a surprise. The dragon comes down and blows up the caravan. I suspect there will be some of that, but I was very interested to see that the showrunners certainly also seemed very aware of that.
Yeah. I mean, you look back on Game of Thrones, it's like 80% just conversation and just characters talking, and
swilling wine.
A lot of times 2 characters in a room. I mean, the action is memorable because it's so well done, and I don't think they've ever done an action scene that was just like one of their other action scenes. They try so hard to make each of them unique, and so they really stand out in our memory, especially considering how well they've gotten at doing them in recent years. But yeah, it's definitely a mix of those big action moments and the quieter, more intimate scenes. Back to the directing of the episode with Sapochnik, one of the quotes added into the online version was Jacob Anderson, who plays Grey Worm. He was talking about how the Winterfell editions in terms of making that set bigger and more expansive, that you get to a point where you're running around that set, and instead, usually when you kind of run through a doorway on a set, you see like plywood and equipment. You don't see more set, and you can go from room to room to room where it's all immersive set, and then you add in, snow and fire and ash, and you add in all these extras and all these actors, and you do these long takes. He was saying that there are times while working on, and plus you're working at like 4 o'clock in the morning, and you're like tired and worn out. He says there are moments that I literally forgot that I was like acting, and that this wasn't real. And he says, and that's just bizarre. That doesn't normally ever happen. That he literally lost himself in the story.
But we usually record our podcast at like 5 or 6 in the morning on a Monday, so that's pretty hard too.
Yeah.
That's pretty hard too.
Yeah. I mean, our jobs are really the hard ones talking about this stuff. Yeah, but just the sheer amount of effort that went into this episode. I mean. And the candor, which and I had to kind of like coax a bit to get the actors to open up about it, because nobody wants to sound like they're whining. No one wants to sound like they're ungrateful for being in it. No one wants to sound like, oh, here you are, this actor who's wealthy and famous, and you're sort of complaining about what you do. But even after just a week on the set, myself, I was wrecked. I actually got like this like crazy like staph infection that took like 2 months to go away. That was it put me in the ER, which I haven't really talked about before. Yeah. In fact, I have a photo. Which I'm not going to show the camera, but I will show you.
Is this in? No.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah.
That's not good at all.
You can't really tell, but it's like creeping down my beard too.
Oh, that's some like.
Yeah, that's some medieval. That's some medieval stuff there, right? Yeah. It's. Did
you go to the ER in Belfast?
It's like grayscale but red and swollen. Yeah. Well, I mean, it started.
Did you just like go to like? Was there a like set medic you could go to?
I noticed that there's.
Oh, now the reporters.
Yeah, they're like, uh-oh. It was like last day on set that I noticed that I was feeling a bit unwell, and I felt like there was something going on, but it wasn't until I was on the flight back that I really knew I was in trouble. And so I went to the ER when I got back to Austin.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and then it was like the first antibiotics didn't work, the second ones didn't work. They had to keep ramping it up.
So you were sick for 2 months?
Yeah, I was sick for 2 months for being in.
We need to do a follow up with all the actors and see. Okay, what was the overall medical loss?
Yeah, well, I mean, just when I was there, I mean, it's in the story. At one point, one of the major actresses on the set, during a scene that wasn't an action scene, that was just like standing there, just collapsed. She just went down, and the showrunners kind of ran. I've never seen the showrunners run in all the years I've been on the set, and they were just out of their tent and like running towards her. There's another crew member that had to go to the hospital for an asthma attack.
One of the things I love about the feature is, you're kind of speaking to the showrunners throughout, and you sort of make it clear that at this point in the run of the show, they do seem to have this sixth sense about what is a calamity and what is just the 90 other minor calamities that may occur over the course of the day, and concerns about drones and all this stuff.
Yeah.
But like in general, so except for when they were running to the set, concerned about what are their leads, what was their kind of mood like? You've spoken to them at every stage of the show from season 1 like onwards. What's the vibe like among these two guys as they are putting the finishing touches on this show? Has it changed notably from where they were at 3, 4, 5 years ago?
I mean, when I was on set, they were in the middle of directing the series finale, and so they were not looking to talk. They were very focused. They were very intense. They were very much looking to obsess about every detail of their episode and get it right. So, I mean, I barely talked to them while I was on set. It wasn't until later. And now they're still doing the, thing where it's like, well, it's still not done. We're still in editing. We're still making choices. We're still putting the final touches on everything. I asked them to sort of tease up the season and say, how's it look? And they're like, oh, well, we don't know yet. So even now, and this is just a couple weeks ago, even now they're still not sort of willing to sort of praise, their own work. They're still in it, and figuring it out.
You kind of mentioned earlier there's a great moment in the story where you're speaking to Maisie Williams and Sophie Turner, and their conversation is going all kinds of great directions. They talk about how the Titanic was made right there. But I guess I'd like to know, you have these great moments in the story of kind of speaking to some of these actors. Was this kind of at a point where were they like, were they kind of making jokes? Was it like the kind of trench humor style? I think Maisie mentions that she had to train for a year.
Yeah, she was asked by the director Miguel Sapochnik like a year before to start training now because this is going to be really hard. And yeah.
But like as far as like kind of coaxing some of these stories out of the actors, was it sort of like talk to me later? Was it kind of like, I mean, it seems like they were all under a great moment of like physical duress at the point that you were on.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is just one of the benefits of being able to cover a show for year after year after year is the actors kind of get to know you and they get comfortable around you, so they don't have their walls up as much. And they were very candid. I mean, Maisie Williams said that there were times you're just broken as a human and you want to cry. Rory McCann, who plays the Hound, was just like, all of us pray we never have to do this again. Ian Glenn, who plays Sir Jorah, was just saying, you just got a bunch of actors, and this is the most unpleasant experience I've had working on the show. And again, it's like when you're there, it's hard to realize. For one thing, it's like you're not in a city. You're not like in an area where there's comforts around you. You're like in the middle of like this farmer's field, just kind of out in a rural countryside. And it's like
you're like in it the whole time. It seems like for them, I mean, you're not always filming, but I don't know. It probably feels that way when you're filming all through the night and then sleeping in the daytime.
Yeah,
it's that or nothing essentially.
And it's like the temperatures are like in the low 30s. It's raining a lot of the time, and so it's cold rain and wind and mud and horse poop and choking smoke and ash and fake paper snow that you end up swallowing. So and you're sort of doing that night after night after night, and you're not getting to bed till 7 a.m. and then you kind of get up and you're kind of zonked, and you just kind of go and do it all over again. So you do that night after night after night, and you just get completely smashed. And some of the heroes on the set were really the extras. Mm-hmm. And we have a thing in the new issue about the extras, because if you think about it, you've never read an interview with the Game of Thrones extra, because they're not allowed to talk to the media, and they don't. And these guys, for like probably less than like $100 a day, they're one of the first people to get to the set. They're one of the last to leave. Nobody knows their name. They don't talk about the show, and they just give every scene their best. And as a showrunner's put it, an extra can make a shot, and an extra can completely ruin the shot. So they always have to just be completely on just as much as the regular actors in terms of filling out the background of those shots.
Yeah, especially when Sapochnik's filming and it's just kind of like, let's do a big pile of people that someone has to climb through.
Right. I mean, yeah, and there are some.
Everyone stay on your toes.
There are some, some pile action in the final season, and you see people in there. What's really funny is you look at those body piles, and you can't tell the difference between living actors faking it and the sort of corpses the crash test dummies corpses that the makeup department makes up, and they all kind of blend together, and then after someone yells cut, the living ones will start to move, and it's just creepy as
What else did you see? We know you saw Sam because you may have single-handedly rescued a moment with Sam looking too badass, apparently.
It was a funny moment just because John Bradley, who's so awesome playing Samwell Tarly, was fighting off whites, and the whites are played by stuntmen, and he was fighting off one after another, and he was looking great. I was like really impressed, at how much Sam has grown, and I was like, oh, Sam looks like a badass, and the producer looked all unhappy. Brian Cogman, who's a producer and a writer on the show, who's just super terrific. And Brian Cogman was just like, "Oh, that's the problem. Sam isn't supposed to look like a badass," and like went in there and sort of told John to like, "Oh, you need to be more Sam-like." And afterwards, John Bradley's just like, "Yeah, it's hard. It's difficult when you're doing some of these shots because you train and you train and you train, and you can do it really well, and everybody wants to look cool, right? I mean, everybody wants to look like Jon Snow, but you have to kind of be your character, and you have to kind of look worse at something than you actually are."
Yeah, well, and again, like I assume again that's just the sort of the added like detail to add in once you've done all the perfect choreography is like now I have to be the person who's not that great at
Yeah,
doing
yeah. Now I have to do that, but deliberately.
You just wanted to look cool,
look bad.
James. You just
Yeah.
wanted to look cool.
I mean, the thing is,
it's a good thing you were there.
I related to that so hard because I was just like, I would feel the same way. I would be like, I don't care what my character is. I want to look like Jon Snow. Who doesn't? Yeah.
James, your feature goes so in depth about the big battle of the season. Is there an official code phrase for it? Or are we just calling it the Battle of Winterfell? Is there some other cool Twitter hashtag thing that we can get going?
Well, I mean,
Winterfallen?
I mean,
no, not good. Not good. Take it back.
On set, they were referring to it as the Long Night because it is a night shoot. But I don't know if that is what they're referring to the battle as, or if that's what they're just referring to the night shoots as. Because after it wrapped, crew members were wearing jackets that said I survived the long night, referring to the 11 weeks of night shoot. But it's interesting because it's like will they title the episode that, because that's what the prequel's supposed to be called. But George R. Martin has said he wants the prequel called that, but HBO hasn't confirmed that. So I'm not sure what's going on there.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
But so besides this, again, this single battle episode, which I love that in your feature you kind of mentioned that there is some theory that this might be the longest. I think is it longest continuous battle sequence in the history of filmed content? Is that the kind of definition that we're working on?
I mean, you sort of.
I tried so hard to dig into what was that silent Napoleon movie that but I don't think it was a continuous battle sequence.
Right. Well, it's so tough because you don't want to say it definitively. Because there could be some silent Napoleon movie which actually beats it, and then you look.
I tried so hard to find.
And then there's someone on Twitter who goes, well, actually, but Miguel was looking for examples, and he looked at there's two that he sort of looked at in particular, and one was Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers, and that's the Great Battle of Helm's Deep, which is a little under 40 minutes. And there's also the movie 13 Assassins, which is a terrific samurai movie. And the first half of that movie is all kind of lead up, and the second half is pretty much all action. And that runs about 40 minutes as well. And he was looking at to try and get a sense of when do you tire out as a viewer?
How do you balance this stuff?
How do you balance this stuff? And he noticed that on Helm's Deep, it's actually not continuous battle. You're sort of cutting between three different stories during that battle sequence.
Because they're cutting to the tree stuff too. They're cutting away from. Oh, sorry. You mean within the sequence?
Yeah. Like even within the sequence, there are different things going on in different parts of the battle, and so you're cutting between them, and they're doing that times 8, in this. So because you're following different characters in their own stories, and it looks like from the trailer that Arya is probably one of them.
Yeah.
And they all have their own story going on within this action sequence. So Arya Stark's storyline is clearly one that you're following, and from what I gather, each storyline is also a slightly different genre. So even though it's all within the same battle, one was described to me as survival horror. I'm sure one is going to be out in the battlefield. I mean, you saw, Jaime Lannister at what looked like at the Winterfell ramparts, leading and yelling. So, you're going to be cutting to different ones that have different feels, and they're all kind of intermixed together. But, some of it's going to be action, and some of it's very much not going to be action. It's all in one action sequence. But one thing Miguel noted, he says the less actual fighting you see in these action scenes, in some ways that's better. So
more anticipation, or more
So when it's longest consecutive action sequence, it's not non-stop fighting. It's that from literally the very beginning of the episode to the very end, it's all this war and all the different things that are going on in between it, and there are quiet moments within that, and suspenseful moments within that, and there's running moments in that, there's fighting moments in that, so it's all kind of mixed together.
And again, what's interesting is this is one episode of the final 6. Obviously a climactic moment in some ways, but I mean, even me knowing nothing, there's clearly a lot more that has to happen in the aftermath of it. I was just so intrigued by the fact that because the trailer that we saw this morning was so heavy on that battle, I was almost for a second kind of because again, I just don't know. I was almost kind of is that going to be the first episode back or something? And it's interesting to me that again, this to me is kind of the cool thing about this season is you do have this gigantic sort of intense war conclusion to what seems like many stories and perhaps many lives on the show moment. But there's sort of more to come after that. I guess that's where the Cersei part of the trailer kind of comes in. As far as like the rest of the season, there's great stuff on that in the feature. But what to you kind of seemed the most compelling as you kind of talking to the people about what's to expect besides the long night, besides Winterfell?
Well, just to riff on that, it's like there's the series opener, which is not the battle. In terms of where the battle actually falls, that hasn't been said by anyone. There's like some rumors out there, but it's basically sort of a secretive thing. So I won't like spoil that. But in terms of what else is going on, that's sort of tricky to talk about, and so I'm not sure I can really get into it. The Cersei storyline, it's funny because as we know, there's like no dialogue. It tells you nothing. I think they're kind of being a bit locked down about that one, and so
she still has the best strategy.
Yeah,
I think. We've discussed this. We talked
yeah.
about this a bit in a preview episode for the season, but like the idea of being like, like I have my own kingdom, which is really far away from where this battle is happening. I'm getting some good backup from like the Greyjoy fleet, and I'm like, I am not going to be totally decimated in this battle against the literal undead and the like blue flame firing dragon.
Yeah.
So I guess she's playing the kind of pick up the pieces game, which seems so long as everyone else heroically defeats the environmental catastrophe for her, she's going to be fine. I find that it's interesting because I think so much of the anticipation for this season is very focused on like these character notes to pay off and this world to save essentially, but there is still a kingdom to win, and she's the one person who's kind of allowed to be thinking about that right now, which is just so, I don't know, it's a great place to be in. I'd want to be in that place if I were someone on the show.
And then of course there's characters like Theon. We didn't see any of Theon.
I'm glad you mentioned it, James.
Oh no,
I was disappointed about that too. What's going on with Theon? He's setting off. He's
saw
him
setting
in the
off
finale.
to rescue Yara.
The payoff of the Greyjoy storyline is what everyone's really waiting for. I think.
Yeah. Well, another thing too. Hound and Mountain. I mean, that's another thing.
This is the stuff I'm talking about. That's interesting. That is just something that has been built up for so long, and yet, I mean, unless something drastically shifts, it doesn't seem like that plays into this sort of long night up in Winterfell sequence. So
it'd be great if the Hound and Mountain had Clegane Bowl like in the middle of the White Walker attack, and they're just like, we don't care
let's do
about the Army of the Dead. We're this is on. Twitter wants it.
They would do that. They would definitely do that in like a samurai movie or martial arts movie. That would happen. They'd be like, okay, like we're setting aside the sort of greater war for a second here.
Right.
For a 10-minute long like mano a mano fight scene.
It's funny because one of our covers is Hound and Mountain, and we got them to cross swords on the cover as our way of sort of trying to make Clegane Bowl happen. In our character teases, there's a quote from Rory, where he says that in terms of his brother, that he will get a chance to face those demons. So he's sort of teasing to at least some sort of resolution with that storyline.
Fascinating. So James, as you mentioned, the new issue is out now with your feature, your interview with George R.R. Martin, and a wide variety of other Game of Thrones related things. Everyone should go buy, I'd say at least 6 of the collectible copies.
Yeah, I think 6 or 7 is good.
Right?
Yeah, sure.
I want the Night King one. That's the one that everybody was really freaked out about, but I'm like, that's the one that I want to get.
The Night King's one great, and we actually have an interview with the Night King in the issue. The actor who plays him, and he never gives an interview. So that was one where I was like, if we put him on the cover, we want to get him.
There's a core fan base for the Night King, and that is certainly
totally.
That is someone who but everyone should check that out. Your feature is up on the internet right now. Everyone can go read that alongside a lot of other coverage that you're putting up. I would say like somewhat consistently between now and certainly through next month. Is there anything else that people should be kind of looking out for on the EW Game of Thrones beat?
Yeah, I'm pretty much, every weekday from here to the start of the new season, we're going to have another Game of Thrones story. We have all sorts of interviews with different actors in the show that we've been, holding to post. So we're going to have a lot of preseason content that will be spoiler-free. And then once the actual series starts to air, we're going to have this podcast coming out probably like every Monday afterward. We're going to have our EW recaps. We're going to have post-mortem interviews that you won't find anywhere else, with different actors, you know, in each episode. So I mean, it's pretty much saturation bombing, like a total like Drogon, you know, flamethrower torching of content. You know, pretty much nonstop all the way through. I think it's finale's like May 19th.
It's 2 days. It's 2 days before my birthday.
Yeah.
So,
awesome. Yeah.
so thank you HBO.
Yeah.
Planned it out just perfectly.
Yeah.
The day before the birthday is going to be hard on us. It's going to be hardest on you, I imagine. But that's going to be a fun Monday morning wake.
I'm sure after all this, I'm just going to just collapse. I collapse like I've been in the
James, you already beat
battle.
the staph infection.
Yeah.
You're coming back stronger than ever. Everyone should definitely check us out. We're going to be back before the season returns for one more preview episode, I think, right?
Yes, yeah. We have one more preview episode sometime after the, like shortly after the premiere screening, because they're gonna do a big premiere screenings in Belfast and New York, and I'm gonna be going to the New York one, and so I'll be able to talk a little bit about, you know, the first episode after that, and sort of do a little more, you know, preview content before the new season.
And of course, we'll be doing new episodes every week after the new season debuts on April 14th. A lot of Game of Thrones stuff coming your way. If anybody wants to chat Thrones between now and then, and I assume pretty much everybody does, tweet at him. He's at James Hibberd. Tweet at me. I'm at Darren Franich. You know, where's all the Night King fans at? That's what I'm all about. Let's hear from him again some more. He's the most important character, it turns out. Maybe not the most important character, but he's high up there.
Yeah.
He's lasted a lot longer on the show than some people have. And we'll be back in a couple of weeks with EW's Game of Thrones Weekly.